I'm not a grief counselor, so I don't know how to do this. But when I feel something to the point where my skin is crawling, I got goosebumps and it's curdling, and I want to scream and lament and tear at my clothes, I can't ignore that. I have to share why. I have to do something, do my part. And the last few videos of people have been watching me, knowing that I was sharing stuff about lamenting, finding a way to pull up your boots and get through the days feeling a little bit better than maybe what life might have been in 600 BC. And I found that in reading King Solomon's words of his conflict of existence and what he was seeing. And everything I've read up to the point that I intended to share with everybody has now come to fruition in the death of one little girl who I didn't learn had passed away until today, when I was at the library trying to work on the finishing improved final touches to the Smallville Reunion Book 1. I couldn't even get to the end because they're just going to court now a year later. I had to stop because I have a story and I need to share that story. And I wanted to read all of the scripture too, but because I have to tell that story, I don't think I can. And plus, I want to hold back tears. I don't want to bawl my eyes out. I'm trying to make a point of here of how, everything has its time and season, even though we will ask ourselves why are we allowed to come into this world. But Solomon sort of helps put a rest to it in his words. So I'm going to tell everybody that they should read Ecclesiastes 3 all the way to the end of 7. But for the sake of time tonight, I'm just going to read 7 right to the end, because I have to share my story. Now, this little girl's name is Sarah, and it really hit me hard because her name was spelled the same way as I named my Sarah. Sara. I took the H off so she would be original, and then I hyphened in her her Ann from Chloe Ann Sullivan to make her name original. So this little girl was born August 23rd, 2013. And passed away last year, and they're just going to court now, and her father, her mother, and her uncle all arrested and charged with murder. This little girl didn't wear how do you say this? Hijabs. Did I say that right? Beginning. The mother never wore one, but over the time that her abuse got worse, they did insane things. Crazier and crazier things. And when police went through the house, they found DNA attached to every of the relatives I mentioned, to different tools of things that were used to hurt her and to cover up the injuries. At some point, it was so crazy, they were taping plastic bags, I guess with like thick packing tape to cover up the injuries to her head, and then sticking the black hijab thingies on it and sending her to school. And she's so young and so tiny, right? It's impossible to do anything that could be bad or to be disobedient or even speak up loud enough, even when you're being injured, that it hurts, other than groans and moans. And so neighbors could hear, and stuff, and that was all that was coming out, and then silence. They could hear the mother when she was alone. Go to your room, you disobedient child. Go to your room, you fucking bitch. Like, literally. And when the dad was home, maybe those words weren't being said, but then he would just work alongside of that. And that's what I'm reading to you guys in the scripture in Ecclesiastes, that Solomon was wise enough to note about this culture and their idol worshiping behavior and actions that have never stopped in all that time. The point of this child's life that she's had no blanket love. You might be under the blankets and put to bed and get up, fed, and sent to school. But there's no cuddling, there's no repentance, there's no forgiveness, there's no sign of remorse, there's no love, right? And all of it is about them wanting to beat what's good in the child out of them. Because when they're little and they're young and God sends them into a world like Canada, where you get a Canadian soul and you see love and goodness and kindness, and you start to feel and exude and replicate that, and then people that have nothing but darkness, that serve death, don't have that. They can't look at it and like it or love it. They mourn it, or they are wanting to devour it, or bitter or resentful or jealous of it. And so then the kid gets abused for being good, and they can't beat it out of her to make her bad. And of course, at some point, she's like, well, I'm just better off to pray to die than to live, because if my being good means to be like them, then this is not going to work, right? I can't be in this world. So something like 2 days went by before something happened. At any rate, the father is the one that calls the police and says in his language that he killed his child for beating her too much, for being disobedient. And she's so tiny and fragile, and never say a word to nobody at school. Never say a word basically ever. How could you possibly call it disobedience? Right? To see something young and vital and growing, alive, and want to get rid of it, wish it didn't exist. It's insane. And to read this today, a year later, I understood why the Thanksgiving yesterday and last year for me was cold and rainy weather, because it wasn't something to rejoice or be thankful over, because she didn't get to enjoy Thanksgiving. But what was that? What is Thanksgiving? Now I'm trying to go somewhere here. My daughter Sarah, when she was in kindergarten, she had been moved around a lot because she wasn't with me, because outside interference was getting in the way of my life as a parent, as a person, as a creator, as a writer, and the things I wanted, and practicing my religion. And where there's Christianity that doesn't conform with the rest of the society's thoughts, there's always trouble. Now, she finally went into this one school where she met this other kid from one of those cultures. I couldn't tell you which one it was. I don't know the difference between them all. There's just so many of them. I just don't. So the mother was white, and the mother was pretty nice. But she didn't see the double-edged sword of what this boy's behavior was like. So in kindergarten, this boy was kicking my Sarah's vagina at school during school hours, kicking her in the pee-pee. These are 5 and 6-year-old kids, pushing her on different days, pulling out of her hair. And I had to complain. Multiple times she'd come home crying, complaining what's going on. I'm like, no, this is not okay. A child that violent and that bad in school should not be in public school at all. Should be segregated, pulled out. They should be given those expellings and stuff that they do. These kids need to go to special reformatory institutions where they get psychological therapy to prevent them from growing up to becoming murderers, like this little Sarah that's dead now, and her mother, and the father, and the uncle. Now, we got our Sarah away from that boy and the mother. We did talk to the mother and tried to explain to her that this is a problem and it's not going to get better. Because his mother's white, he can't hurt his mother, take it out on her. She's older, bigger. So he's looking for girls in his environment in our country that he could dominate, control, make himself feel worthy or more important, whatever goes on in their heads when they're behaving that way at such a young age. What could he have possibly been exposed to and taught already to be treating my Sarah like that? And then for me to read about this Sarah. Now, my Sarah is 15, going to be 15 December 29th. And this Sarah that just passed away last year at 10 wasn't born for 5 more years from the time I pulled my Sarah away from that kid. and complained to the school and said, do something. And to the mother. And had multiple conversations. And so my Sarah is still alive, and she's okay because she's in Burlington, in a place where there's a reduced number of all that stuff that they do wrong in the name of the devil, mammon. Anyways, the point is this Sarah, how long she was going to school, one day she wasn't wearing anything on her head, and then suddenly, all of a sudden, her head was covered all the time to cover up what was going on. How nobody could notice that there's something wrong, that her silence and her bereaved antisocial or isolating behavior would not be a signs that something's up. But they showed a picture of what her hair looked like, her head looked like, when there was nothing on her head. And the hair was so thin and straggly, you could see the skull almost in there. I guess from all the effort of having to take off the tapes and the bags, to bathe and wash her or whatever. But on the last round of the beatings and abuse, it just to the point where, because the head trauma was never being allowed to completely heal itself and never going to hospital, doctors, x-rays, CAT scans, whatever, that was it, right? There was just no more life left in her because she was so young and helpless, and it made no sense that you just breathe your last breath. And to read that they're just going to court about it now, and I saw a picture of the mother's eyes. I saw a picture of her face and her expression. And I'd never seen it like that. It was so cold and callous and so satisfied in her position of dominating and being abusive and mean, to counteract not getting abused or picked on herself, but to be the poison in a three-way situation between the boyfriend and his brother. Maybe it's her brother, but that it oozed out that they would copy. And so that's where it comes to Ecclesiastes 7 that I'm reading to you now. It's sectioned as wisdom. So Solomon said this: a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. So that's the reason I wasn't able to enjoy Thanksgiving for a few years, right? Because I had the wisdom, my heart has the wisdom to be in a house of mourning. I just didn't know what I was mourning or who I was mourning beyond my uncle and the people that were passing away from the overdoses. Like, that was just lots of mourning. For death is the destiny of every man. The living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. So you see my frowns, right? It's making me feel better because I feel. And when I feel, I let it out. I express it. If it hurts, when I can, I'll cry. The heart of the wise... Whoops, I lost my spot. Hang on. Yeah, because a sad face is good for the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better to heed a wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. Extortion turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider, God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, man cannot discover anything about his future. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these. A righteous man perishing in his righteousness, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. The man who fears God will avoid all extremes. Wisdom makes one wise man more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. And this is King Solomon saying that about himself. Whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? It's probably the smartest thing he said about the gift of wisdom he asked God for. So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity and wickedness and the madness of folly. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered, adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things. While I was still searching, but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found. God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes. So that section is an absolute description of this woman that really abused her child to the point where she got the brother, the uncle, and the boyfriend to join in. So the three of them were picking on this helpless little girl until she died at the young age of 10. I was fortunate enough to get my Sarah away from the boy beating up her, kicking her vagina, pushing her and pulling her hair away, so my child is still living. But now nobody's mourning this Sarah's life. And because I started knitting, it's occurred to me that I had a plan to make my Sarah a blanket for her 15th birthday. So now there's a double meaning between the two stories of these Sarahs and the blanket. Because as a child, I had a very traumatic experience. And there was no blanket love there for me either. And there's many, right? People outside all over the place, right? There's no blanket love. There's nothing to shroud them and protect them like you feel as a kid when you have the bedtime stories and you get tucked into bed and kissed on the forehead. So I have to do a blanket for this child in her honor, in her memory. And it's going to be Sarah's blanket because she lived and her life mattered. And she should have been in foster care where somebody would have loved and wanted her and given her every opportunity to be all she was meant to be. And I wish that our system would take murderers like that father, that mother, and that uncle and send them to the death row prisons in the States and get rid of them, vanquish them from the planet. When you murder after beating a little girl for years till she's dead, you deserve to be put to death. Not to be allowed to continue to live, breathe, eat, shower, have clean clothes, and watch TV and get entertainment. None of it. Right? She's gone. She's lost her life. They should all lose theirs. And when I saw that disturbing look in the picture of the mother as I was reading about what's going on in the courts this year, I was so disturbed. I had to come home. I had to stop what I was doing because I can't work on the Smallville reunion movie book 1 in any way and feel any kind of goodness there with that going on, knowing that nobody's made this little girl a blanket, honoring her birth and her life, celebration of life, and the fact that the schools aren't doing anything. The neighbors aren't doing anything. This country is so full of abuse domestically and violence towards women and kids. And we have a horrendous background statistically of all the women and children dead from the 40s in our country, all the way across from the Maritimes, all the way up to the residential deaths. It's a bloodbath. It's worse here than in America. Over there, they have issues with gangs and drugs and guns because of poverty, but it's not domestic violence. It's not emotional covert incest. It's not all these other variations of the things that our country is still riddled with, to the point where even tourists coming over are taking their life in their own hands, not knowing if they're going to get home alive. The mother and daughter that came from France that got killed in Montreal just weeks ago, in this month of October, burned to a crisp in a building they were in. Some vendetta, I guess, from Montreal Mafia towards some lawyer guy who owned these buildings for whatever reason. And another girl that was here from Australia planting trees in BC. She's listed as one of the many missing and murdered women along the Highway of Tears. So then we shouldn't be trying to bring on the problems of other countries and cultures and communities in other parts of the world, because we don't even have our own country and culture and crimes under control. We don't have it in us to be able to pay attention and do anything about anybody else from anywhere else. So now I'm going to talk about my story. Just one of them. When I was 10 years old, well, I wasn't 10 yet. When I was 9 years old, I was discovering ice skating on the ice rink outside in the backyard of the school I went to. I was skating with my then best friend, little Rachel, and it was dark and it was cold, and she's like, okay, I'm going home. I'm done. I guess like the sun went down, and she has a really pretty good relationship with her mom. She likes being home and being with her mom. So she was like, I'm going to go eat dinner and stay in for the rest of the night. Now, I was silly enough to think I want to keep practicing and keep skating, and I had too much freedom, not enough discipline or love. So I started jumping and doing twirls, and I was cold too. And I'm going to wear my skates back to the apartment, get dressed up, and put on leggings and sweatpants and stuff and go back out. And I didn't have a mother that was good enough to say, hey, it's after dark, it's late, and I think it was even a school night. Stay home. You're done. You can go skate on another day. So I went back out, and there's a catwalk that takes me back to the field where you get to the ice rink. And there was black ice. It was so clear, you couldn't see nothing. I stepped on that with the skates, and I fell down so fast into positions I was not flexibly trained for through acrobatic schools or workouts. And I busted my right leg in 4 spots. The tib fibs under the knee and above the ankle. So literally, if I didn't have muscles and sinew and skin holding the pieces together, my foot and my leg bones would have all fallen to the ground in pieces in different places. And I was left lying there in the dark at night, screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. And I was in a suburban neighborhood in the wintertime in Winnipeg where everybody was home because it's school time. And I'm looking around at all these neighborhood houses, and nobody's flinching. Nobody's making a move. There's no sound, no doors opening, no windows, no blinds moving, nothing. And I keep screaming. And finally a car comes by and literally drives just by my head. And they pull into the very first house, right next to where I was lying in the little fence area of the catwalk. And they pull in and they get out of the car. And I'm lying there screaming. And they go into their house. The husband, the father, the son, and the daughter. And the kids must have been similar to my age. And I couldn't believe that they walked into the house. And at 9 years old, I can't calculate a way of communicating enough words to be able to say much more than I need an ambulance, somebody call me 911 or whatever. They go away. And I'm still screaming and lying there and needing help, asking for an ambulance. Somebody help me. Like, it was crazy. Like, just lots of screaming, crying. Couldn't vocalize. Finally, I don't know how long it was. It could have been, to me, it felt like an hour. But it could have been 30 minutes. Before the mother finally comes back out and asks me if I'm okay. She asks me if I'm okay 30 minutes after driving in to their driveway, and I was screaming then if I'm okay 30 minutes later when I'm still screaming because I can't move. It's not like Karate Kid with Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san. You can't actually stand on a broken leg. You can't even get up off the ground. So I said, no. I managed to muster up this at 9 years of age. No, I'm not okay. I have a broken leg. I need an ambulance. Please call 911. She didn't listen. She didn't have the capacity to understand that I'm not asking for my mom. I'm not asking for help from a family member. I'm not asking to be taken home. I'm asking to be taken to the hospital. And she asks me more questions. Well, do you have a phone number? And should I call your mom? Can I call her? And I guess I gave her the phone number because she goes back in the house while I'm still lying there screaming, my leg is broken, I need help, somebody call me 911. And the tears are still streaming down my face. Now the internal bleeding has already started. And the shock is already starting to kick in. And Lord knows what's happened to my kidneys for how long I've been lying there so far. And she gets the operator to disconnect the call because happenstance, of course, my mom is on the phone talking to her friend who is downstairs in the same building. It's the mother of the little girl that was my best friend. And so instead of hanging out with each other in the same place, they're just yapping on the phone. So the operator in those days could actually interrupt a call. So they interrupted the call, and the woman tells my mom about the problem of my situation. So she gets dressed and waddles over to where I am. I don't know how much longer that takes, but eventually she shows up, and I'm still lying in the same place on the ice on the catwalk at 9 years of age on a winter's night in Winnipeg. Very cold winter's night in Winnipeg. That's why it's called Winterpeg. On a school night in a suburban neighborhood where everybody's home with their children. Not a Christmas holiday. And they're all standing there. The mother, the father, the son, the daughter, and my mother. And to this point, there's still been no ambulance called. No police. Nobody showed up. Whether it was from the five of them or somebody in the neighborhood. Nothing. So I can completely understand what's happening to this little girl when she's 9, when the beatings and the abuse of this Sarah's life probably started to ramp up a little bit more. Because she's starting to grow and become her own person, and there was goodness in her. Now, they had the nerve to try to get me to stand up on my good leg and ask me if I could hop on my good leg to the house. Now, you can't hop or wobble when you have 4 broken bones shaking around in your skin on the other leg at 9. And I'm screaming at them, I can't move, I can't move, I can't move, because the bones move when you move. So they get the brilliant idea that the big man, the husband, would throw me over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He puts me over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. God, I'm going to cry. And my leg pulls apart. The right leg pulls apart. The ankle part falls apart from the bones that are completely busted clean. And the knee pulls apart from the completely busted clean breaks underneath that. And the bones are just sitting there in between. And there's a separation between those 3 spots. And he starts walking with me to the apartment where we lived. And then we get to the apartment, we're in there, and I had to feel that the way it was all the way there. He gently puts me down on the stairs, and my mother looks at me and says, can you push yourself up on the stairs? Can you waddle up on your bum up the stairs to get yourself to the apartment? I tried to be brave, right? I don't even know why they're asking me to do this. I'm 9 and I should have already gone to the hospital. I couldn't do it. I moved to try to move myself. I lifted. I can't. My leg is broken. It hurts too much. I can't move up to the next step, right? I want a hospital. I need to go to the hospital. Call me an ambulance. My leg is broken. Call 911. So she gets the guy to lift me up again and takes me to her girlfriend's apartment. And at this point, there had been an arrangement where my friend Rachel, out of all of these people, would have been the only one who loved me enough, who cared enough, who had the heart with the love and the intelligence enough to have snuck away with a cordless phone. Thankfully, we had cordless RCAs, and would have been able to call 911 to say my friend's leg is broken. She needs an ambulance. So they take me to her apartment because the arrangement had been made that Rachel had been removed from the equation. The mom had taken her to someplace else to sleep for the night. So I was laid on Rachel's bed in their apartment, and my mom went back to the living room to hang out and visit with her friend to finish whatever they were yapping about when they were on the phone talking in the first place. She came in a little while later, started to loosen the skate a little bit, but I'm like, don't even think about trying to take the ice skate off and take my clothes off. Leave me alone. Because I had done swimming lessons and first aid enough to know that what I was wearing was acting like a brace. It was keeping everything in place, keeping me safe and protected. So to just loosen the laces and the skates, because that swelling was going to get worse. And you can't have that restricted when the brakes are completely through. And it was like I could see through the door, the light in the dining room, the chandelier above the table, my mom sitting on that side and Joyce sitting on that side, and they're drinking beer. And my mom's not an alcoholic. She's tried to drink beer sometimes to fit in a little bit here and there. Just terrible at doing that fitting in thing, but yet she tries. And this is why I believe in God, and this is why I know Jehovah's real, that Jehovah is the true God. This is why I drew closer to God, because I didn't have anyone else. Now this little girl, Sarah, was being raised in the opposite. There's no hope, no God of my kindness, of compassion and care, but there's a connection here. The point being is that my God, throughout all of this, did not call me an ambulance. He let me stay on that bed. I was left in that situation because of the same thing with this child, where you were given that time where you were being challenged, I guess, by evil on whether or not your injury is so severe that you would succumb to the injury if you're neglected and ignored and left there for the injury to overcome you. So that's the reason I was left there. Now, God did one thing really quickly after my mom left the room, closed the door, left me in the dark. I could feel him come down right into the room. God himself comes to the foot of the bed, and he takes my feet up in his nostrils, I swear, or whatever, his breath, and he just overcomes me with breath. And by the time God covers my head with the blanket of his life force, he knocked me out. I was gone like a light, just out, because I was internally bleeding and I was in a state of shock that, if left alone and left in a conscious state, probably would have led to death. Could have succumbed by the injuries. But because he cared, because I was his child, putting me to sleep slows down the heartbeat, slows down the heart rate, slows down the blood, controls the swelling and the internal bleeding. And so I lived from my injuries, because my injuries were not from the head. It wasn't a cranium and brain and skull smashing epidemic. So when my daughter Sarah started getting kicked in the vagina by this Iranian kid in kindergarten, I lost my mind, because I said to God, not my kids. You can do whatever you want to me, because I've already suffered so much at the hands of evil in this country from all the trauma and abuse I've lived through. That's fine, but leave my children alone. So I was like, this is too far for me, too much. But to learn about this Sarah dying at 10 and mine going on 15 and having no hope for her because she was never taught that she was allowed to believe in a good God. Right? Of course, she's going to succumb to her injuries, and God's going to take her soul back and call her home, because that's the only safety and rescue there is for her. And this woman is to blame for it. And there's that information in the story already. So for me, what happens, I didn't actually get to the hospital until the very next day. I lived to see the day, I guess I woke up at some point. I don't remember much about what happened when the sun was up the next day, in and out. So I lived, and because I lived, my mother's conscience finally kicked in. I guess she'd been told by some divine intervention on God's part, hey, she's got a broken leg, and it's been broken all night, and it's still broken this morning, call the ambulance. So she does. And then I remember being in the ambulance, not in the ambulance, at the hospital. I don't remember much of the ambulance or the emergency room, because I flew out of that ambulance and out of the ER and into a special room where there was a bright light. Brighter than this one, was a white room. And they had me on this table. And again, they had to move my leg. They put me on this triangular pad thing where they had to fold the leg so they could x-ray it in a certain way where they could see exactly what was wrong. And I had the actual blessing of getting a doctor that believed in God, by the grace of God. He believed in God, and he prayed about it, because the injuries were so bad, the breaks were so bad. The doctor did not know what to do, whether to put in pins or just leave the leg to set, because there was another little blessing in all of that moving and shaking around. I was wearing so many layers. I was wearing so many layers of clothing that I had built myself that protection like you do in first aid. And it kept the bones. When I got settled down, it kept the bones in the right line. So when they were placed back together, they realigned in perfect alignment. So my bones were not crooked. You didn't have to go in, cut up and move the bones and realign and then pin them together. So the doctor decided, I'm just going to put her in a back cast, let the swelling go, and just pray that the leg will set and heal on its own in perfect alignment, and not have to put any pins in it. But he said that I would never walk normal again. And I think, I'm going to cry. I want to cry. That time in the hospital, the care I got from the staff was probably some of the best love and care and kindness as a little kid at that point in my life I had ever personally received. But I can never forget ongoing from there why nobody was ever called. Not a police officer ever showed up to talk to my mom. Not a social worker. Nobody came to the school. There was no counseling. There was no social service requirements where there had to be something in place in order for her to be allowed to retain custody of me. It's just not right. It's nuts. And this is Canada. This was happening in my childhood. And so these kind of deaths should not be happening. We're not doing enough. And Justin thinks he's a good person, and we think we have a reason to vote, that we have something to vote for. Well, we don't. There's nothing. Because no change is taking place, no happening, no improvements. We are literally in the hands of Jesus Christ and his return, the second coming. Because what Solomon is pointing out here is that in the end, the best part, the best blessing for her is the life she's going to get when she comes back. Because this little girl is going to be allowed to know God and know Jesus and know life and living in a world after this with no pain and no suffering, no sickness. And she won't have that woman or that man or that strange uncle around at all for her to be reminded of what happened in this life. So I'm going to go and make a blanket. Well, I got to make 2 blankets for the sake of both Sarahs. My Sara and what happened to her in kindergarten that I was lucky enough to get her away from before multiple years of going to school with the same kid had continued into more battery and issues without schools or police doing anything. And a blanket for this child. As an adult later in my life, in Toronto, in fact, I had to stay at this what do you call it? I guess home share place for people have limited income and ability to access their own housing and full-time work. Now, I didn't have sheets. I didn't have blanket. I didn't have pillow. It was probably some of the worst months of my life, feeling like that, so naked and raw, without any love, any care, any blanket at all. Lying there trying to sleep on this mattress like you would get when you're in the hole in prison or in the psych ward, and they've locked you up because they want to drug you because you're not behaving yourself or you're being violent or hurting yourself. And it was awful. I think it lasted 4 months before I was able to have all these things you need for your bed. And that was the worst experience of my life as an adult, beyond the traumas and abuses that I had already been living through as a kid. Walking around in my life raped all the time as it was already traumatizing enough, and then as an adult end up going through that. And so today I just completely tore apart, like lamenting if I could have ripped my clothes for this child, because I knew exactly how she's felt. And then I'm still here, but she's gone. And she's so little and so tiny and helpless and hapless to could do nothing, that God could only do one thing, because it wasn't going to end or go away. It wasn't going to stop, and nobody was going to protect her. And he had to take her life back. And I guess this rest that she needed, her spirit needed, didn't come until today. I could feel her spirit like flying over me with the birds in the sky, because it took somebody that could relate to that version of abuse and abandonment and trauma and nakedness and blanketlessness. Look, at even if she was being tucked into bed under a blanket, there was no care or love or nurturing or repentance, anything, no time to recover, to get well or anything, for it to stop, just even for a while. And I did get that today, and I understood all of it, and so I had to make this video. And so I'm telling you guys, you should make blankets for love. I call it blankets of love or blanket love. If you can knit or crochet, find people outside, homeless, cold, and give out those blankets. Find people's names and make blankets and put their names in it. And say Sarah's blanket, Trevor's blanket, Noelle's blanket, Jessica's blanket, and give them blankets with their names on it. Or go find the tombstones or the headstones of children that have been killed in our country. Domestic violence, the residential schools, or the murdered and missing women where we have solved their murders and know who's killed them. And you lay blankets in places, hang blankets. But let's do something by having enough blankets that show that this is a problem, it's bad, and we need to do something. And giving out blanket love is a good place to start in using your skills and talents in the healing process necessary as we find ways together to fix our legal system, our criminal system, and sanctioning the bad people. Because what's happening is that there's more power for the people that are doing bad than there is in protecting the innocent. I will end with just a little section here. In For Oppression, Toil, and Friendliness, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And that's what it's all come down to. I had a younger brother born stillborn. He had a fully formed body at whatever many months he was born, but he was born stillborn, so he got to go away and not see the evil. And it's better that he didn't have to. And I feel terrible that this child had to live 10 years in these confined environments. We don't even know how young it was when she started, because if my daughter was in kindergarten when it started with that boy, it could have very well been most of this little girl's life, 5 years of it. Can you imagine that, going to school for that long? being around people for that long and nothing done until your life just goes back to the Lord. So I'm going to make Sara's blankets. I'll keep you guys in tune on the Sara blanket thingies with the two Saras, my Sara, her Sara, and the names they have. Put her birthday on it, and I'll put like a celebration of life. And this is my woman's devotional Bible, the gift I got from somebody many years ago, which I am so grateful for. like even if somebody were to give me a new one, you wouldn't get me to stop reading this one. It was the best gift I've ever been given in my life, even though I hadn't read it much when I got it and didn't know how much I would read it. Boy, have I made up for that over time. So I'm going to go finish taking the rest of the spare cabbage rolls out, and I just wanted to share that. It's just somebody had to talk about her life, celebrate her existence, and that she was a good child, and that it's okay to be good. And you don't have to be bad, and you can't beat the good out of somebody. And that if it comes down to that point in time, don't be afraid to give your life back to the Lord. Let the Lord's will be done, because you will have a better future wherever He's going to bring you back to, than to try to fight to stay in a place where it's not going to get any better. So I'm grateful that her suffering has ended, and I'm grateful my daughter has gotten away from what was happening to her, and I've got mixed emotions about my still being here, but I do hope I can take my creativity and my skills as a writer and other artists kind of features of my creativity, and do things that will help make a difference and honor the memories of those lost and those struggling and fighting now silently, as we live and breathe day to day. 50% of the women, 1 out of 2, are abused, to put it politely, and less than 50% report it. So that's bad on the level of crime and police and lawyers and judges and things that can never be convicted for, including me. I've never had anybody arrested or convicted for anything. And who knows what they went on to do and how many others. And that's what's happening. So if we can't get that under control here, then we shouldn't even be letting tourists into our country, because it's dangerous for everyone, including them. So peace out, guys. Thanks for watching this and letting me confess my soul to you after reading that, and why I couldn't work on the Smallville Reunion movie book 1 today at the library, because reading about that little girl's lost life was just horrible. And I'm going to go and mourn some more. All I could do, literally, I couldn't think of anything else when I left the library, was going to get the latte, like the hazelnut coffee from the corner store, the Chinese place I shop from, because all I could think about was just having a cup of coffee, no food, nothing else. And so I'm going to sit in peace the rest of the night here. I'm going to knit, work on patches for a blanket, or plan her blanket, how to do a Sara's blanket. God bless you all. Peace out. Good night. Superwoman signing off.